Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 25th DEI Committee meeting. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. So we start with looking at the minutes from our last meeting. Let me give you guys a minute to take a peek at that. Do I have a motion to accept those minutes? Nina, and a second from Rebecca. Are there any comments or questions? All in favor? Blanca, are you in favor or are you asking a question?
Oh, I'm exuberant. I'm in favor.
So much favor. Excellent. So we will accept those minutes and move forward with the reports from the subcommittees. We're going to go alpha as usual. Communications. Do we have a report out from you?
We did meet. I did not take minutes. I don't know if Matt, I think you were in your car for this one.
Memory test.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll step in.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. So as Rebecca mentioned, this one I was mobile for. Communications met, and it was in the middle of the focus group time, and so really what we centered on was about communication that's going out to all the different administrators and making sure that we're able to keep up with that and have a consistent message. As an aside, I've heard positive feedback about that, updates being shared with faculty. I think that that's definitely gone a long way. It's helpful. So making sure that we're able to keep that initiative up, as well as once the focus group stuff is done, thinking about ways to be able to craft communication surrounding things like the fireside chats and just what that's going to look like. But it was a briefer meeting, mostly because I was going inside for one of the focus groups and I covered part of it. But that was the gist of what communications talked about. I don't think I'm leaving anything out. That sound about right? All right.
All right. Thank you so much. Community engagement. Does someone speak to that?
So back to me. Just because there's a lot of moving parts with this one, I am very, very, very excited to share with this group. I sent an email to this group once right after the meeting, but sharing publicly, the engagement community was able to map out dates from January through the end of the year for a new initiative called Fireside Chats. And we spoke a little bit about this last meeting, but the gist is these are designed to be just open forums. There's not an agenda tied to them. There are spaces for community members to be able to reach out, to come sit with us, talk with us, ask questions, engage in conversations around district work surrounding DEI, give suggestions, give feedback. It's really just a public engagement tool. And I'll share the dates and times now, and then folks can expect further communication as well about the dates and times, but just so we have at least a start here. So for January, next Tuesday, the 31st, we'll have a group meeting at 12 to 1, and all of these are going to be at the public library, Gilsburn Public Library. In February, on February 15th, there'll be a group meeting from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. And we alternated, it's going to be during the day and then in the evening each month. March is Tuesday, March 21st from 12 to 1 p.m. April is Thursday, the 27th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. May is going to be Tuesday, the 16th from 12 to 1 p.m. And then June is going to be Thursday, the 8th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. So that is something we're really excited to have that mapped out. And we did have an earlier one before, but this one we're hoping to really ramp up the number of community members who are able to attend. And that was the idea between alternating times, have some daytime meetings and some evening meetings to be able to work around folks' schedules. The only other thing from engagement to share is just that people have continued to meet with and attend PTA meetings. So we do have that as another point of contact that's happening across our different buildings.
Thank you, Matt. Research Committee. Did you meet?
Hi, I'll start that. I think there's a few things though that I might have to ask Matt to pick up on. I'm actually gonna lead with what you were just talking about because a very large part of our meeting um was on the focus group since it was in the thick of it. And I think that like one big takeaway from a lot of the participants was the value in having such a good outlet. So, we started to talk about like what the perspective was going forward for focus groups, like even on a smaller level, smaller scale, post this process. Parents seem to really like the opportunity to express their feelings and their thoughts. Um, and on the note of the fireside chats, one question that kind of came up too was a virtual aspect because a lot of the parents spoke about, virtual being a good opportunity because a lot of people don't have the same, availability to do an in-person event now that we have the new method of meeting virtually. So that was one topic, and the research committee would serve as a way to reach out to parents and poll their interests into whether or not they would want to conduct future meetings in a similar way. The second topic we spoke about was because SROs are still an ongoing process. We were curious as to where the board committee was in terms of operating, if it's still operating or not. And the way the research committee might be able to serve for that would be to just check in with parents, or I guess just more students and staff, to see how they're feeling about the SROs, how it's going, and to check into that by maybe some kind of a stakeholders group just to provide some feedback for us to use going forward with that. The third announcement, which is pretty exciting, as we mentioned in the last meeting, Nick Harris is part of our subcommittee. He's the school psychologist in Gilderland Schools, and he met with the president and the chair of research for the NYASP, which is the New York Association of School Psychologists. And the feedback was wonderful. The upshot is that they think that the survey is a great idea. They would like to, if we're willing to do that,
Terrific. That leaves student voice.
So we met and we talked about opening up the student voice subcommittee meetings to other students who aren't a part of the officially part of the DEI board. And we previewed this form. I'll paste it into the chat. Or if someone could, that'd be great. But we would have the form open to both students and adults, and we were kind of thinking of a timeline to send it out. We were thinking at the end of the quarter, but that's a bit soon, so it might change. And then we also talked about making a video, like addressing and kind of explaining what we do here at the DEI committee and as a student voice subcommittee, kind of like the one that Officer Ralston had, which was really good. And we could have other students make commentary on like being part of student voice as like the club in the high school and also as a part of this subcommittee. And we met following the focus groups, or we met before the focus groups, and we were talking about having our student representatives facilitate a high school group and having our middle school representatives facilitate a middle school group. And we could have the other part the other people on the subcommittee, like Blanca and Katie, to lend the year to students. And like basically what these groups would do, they would be open to people or students who haven't had a chance to participate in meetings like this or even be a part of like the Student Voice Club. And we also talked about developing more open relationships and trusting relationships with the adults in our community and in our schools. And yeah, that's basically it.
Thank you, Savannah. All right. Thank you for putting the form in the chat, Matt, if anyone wants to take a look at that. And then we have DEI in action next. So Matt can multitask.
Yes, right now the form is, that's a good point. It is domain locked to Gilderland. The intentionally so, just to make sure that it was just Gilderland students that were getting it. But that being said, if anyone, feel free to send me an email afterwards and I can just send you screenshots of it. But in essence, it just asks, it has descriptions of what student roles, adult roles are in the group. And then you can make sure that we get feedback from FMS GHS students. And that's really what it's encompassing. To the point of DEI in action, I'm gonna try to keep this part a little bit smaller than normal, just because there's a lot of other things that have been happening with the audit work, and that's just gonna definitely need a lot of time. So to the first point, families already received notification of this, but I think it's worth noting that earlier in the beginning of the month, on January 6th, actually, GHS ended up having a assembly that was geared towards making sure students were aware of sexual harassment and sexual assault, the definitions of those terms, what they mean, how to spot it. And that presentation was done in conjunction with an outside partner and also some students. And FMS was able to have an assembly, but that one was based more on P2. And I've spoken with a lot of folks who've then taken things from there and done branch work in their own classes. And one really, really cool application I'd like to share was a series of different video units where they're spending time in the beginning of each class looking through their content through the lens of a character trait that they've already looked at. And so the video segments might be like, 1 to 2 minute clips, and then they're evaluating everything through that lens and seeing how does that apply to what we're doing and how does that apply to the things that you're learning in other classes. And so there's folks doing things like that across the building as well. And then at the elementary level, there's been a lot of work happening, particularly with first and second graders, really through the lens of celebrating a wide range of cultures, and being able to look and have a bit more experience of what do celebrations look like for my culture as well as for the culture of all their classmates. And what I am particularly happy with and proud of is that folks are doing this beyond just the cultures represented in their classroom. And so what's happening in the broader community beyond that. So there's been a lot of work surrounding that, as well as work surrounding similar things that are also being cross-referenced in P2, work surrounding identity and work surrounding affirmations. So that work has been going on fairly consistently, and everything I've been seeing with it, from student responses and reactions and feedback to staff feedback, has been really, really positive in all three of those domains. So definitely January has been a very packed month with a lot of DEI stuff happening across the district, which does lead us pretty well into our next topic. But I'll let you do the transition, Chris, in case anyone has any questions about any things I just said.
Yeah, don't throw me off here. So any questions on the inaction? Because we are moving on to the equity audit update. Lots going on there.
Yes. So for the first part, if you don't mind, Dr. Wells, I'll give a broad overview of what the focus group structures look like and then kind of fill things in from there. So starting in the beginning of this month and really actually up until tomorrow, we've been in the process of doing work with focus groups. Now, the focus groups have been targeting the three main stakeholder groups that are part of the educational process. So, students at every single building and level, staff from any role in the building were invited to be part of these focus groups, as well as parents and community members were also invited to be part of focus groups. And these groups were it's 1 hour slots where we were just really having a forum for voices. The intention of the groups is to be able to gather information and get qualitative data and experiences and stories from each of those different stakeholder groups to be able to inform plans that the district is going to use to be able to drive the work happening this year, the remainder of this year, and then the year afterwards, 3 years and 5 years. So there's short, medium, and long-term planning that's happening based off of largely what we see in the focus groups, as well as what we're seeing with some of the quantitative data. That would be things like attendance numbers, what we are seeing in testing, what we're seeing in discipline records, those kinds of data points, as well as the stories here. Now, the way that these were structured, Natalie McGee, who we've been working with progression partners, and myself, or in some instances just myself, we have met with each of the different groups, and we really took on the role of listeners. So our position in that was not to necessarily be participants in that group, because we don't want to shape or pepper people's words or try to do anything like that where we're interfering in that. We really want to get the unfettered thoughts of each of the different groups. And a lot of members from this group actually were present and participated in the focus groups, which was really, really tremendous. And it was great to see the representation happening across each of our different buildings. Some were even able to make it to more than one. And I left with very, very positive impressions of those meetings. One of the other aspects of them is trying to make sure that we keep any individual's comments and thoughts to be confidential. So I won't go into the specifics of everything that's said, but I do want to share that all of the different thoughts that emerged, we have those records, and what we're doing with that is we're producing summaries that are going to go to each of the different building equity teams. And that's going to lead me into the second point. So each of the different equity teams across the district met earlier this month as well, and had their first full day dedicated to action planning work. And again, those action plans are short, middle, and long-term goals, and they're going to be directly informed by the feedback that happened from the group. And then the next step after the plan is made, the plans will be shared with each of the different buildings, and then we'll get some more feedback, with the goal of really implementing things and starting that work in earnest next year and beyond. So that's kind of a large overview of some of the things that happened. Is there anything that I'm forgetting or am not going into as much detail with, Dr. Wiles?
No, I think that was a great summary. I think what we're really working through with Progression Partners is a lot of gathering of both qualitative and quantitative data to understand where we are and where we need to go. And so it's been really helpful to take kind of take a listening perspective and hear what people have to say instead of making assumptions about what the work should be. So this is going to be really good to help us focus our energies going forward. So that's all I'll add.
Thank you. And right before I call you, I do want to add, that was that same point of making sure that we're not making assumptions about what folks' thoughts are. That was the very but what we'll need is to try to say, okay, how do we get things to be consistent? And say, by the time everyone is past elementary, what does it mean to be an FMS student? So to have common language and things like that, then from FMS, common language by the time they're in high school. So that's really how that like monitoring part is going to work.
Any other questions or comments on that update? You said that was going to take a lot longer, Matt. I was concerned.
Well, I know I can be rambly, so I was trying my best to contain myself.
Matt, did you want to talk about any of just the broad themes that you heard in the process of the focus groups? I mean,
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
particular stories, but just sort of the 30,000-foot big ideas that you heard.
Absolutely. So starting with some of the student feedback pieces, I left smiling after each elementary one because things ranged from should students all be able to have ID cards to get into the buildings, to things that are concerns like playground equipment, or about should we select our teachers, and so there was that full range. But I think one of the things that I heard consistently across all the elementaries was that students felt that their teachers were good teachers and they felt like warm and welcome in their buildings. And as we saw students getting older, some of the things that popped up, we saw kids getting more reflective of some, as much as there was a lot of positive experiences, we also saw more cliques forming. And we saw that students were thinking about areas of, okay, how do we address issues like bullying? How do we address issues that are happening with people simply being unkind? We saw because of the size of those buildings, FMS ended up having 2 groups, and the high school ended up having 3. In each of those meetings, despite being from the same building, they had very, very different tones. They had different focal points, and that was particularly interesting to me. And while there were definitely some things that were in common, there were a lot of different strands. So one piece that was consistent was and this actually was K-12, thinking about buses and thinking about in those spaces that aren't necessarily always going to have an adult that's present in each of the seats. Obviously there's a bus driver, but middle back of the bus and different spots in the cafeteria, hallways, things of that nature. From staff, I think one of the things that we've seen a lot, well, that one's hard because that varies very much per building. But a consistent thing is that people do feel like they are working in a very professional environment and that they have dedicated colleagues. And that's something that emerged at each of the different buildings. The parent and community one, that one also varied quite a bit per building. But one of the things that I heard, and honestly, if you were on one of these, you can feel free to speak, from your own specific lens, not, telling someone else's story, but from your own lens, was that people felt that they liked their school. I heard a lot of things about that. And I also think, though, that one thing that emerged was trying to make sure that we did more things like this. Nina spoke on it earlier, but a lot of community members really, really enjoyed having an opportunity to have a voice and having a forum to be able to talk about things. Something that was kind of sad, many have felt like they haven't always had a voice or a space to be able to air their thoughts, their concerns, their feelings. And so it does make me think that it's definitely something where we want to make sure we have as many opportunities for people to have engagement. And something else that popped up a bit too, and while we do have, this is subcommittee work, but I think it still is important for all of us to be aware of, is that many folks didn't know when these meetings were happening, or didn't know, and some honestly didn't know that there was a committee. And so when I heard that emerge, it made me think about, okay, well, so what are ways that we are communicating, and what are ways that we haven't considered communicating, and how do we do that part better? I also think there are a couple of efforts where we'll see how much the fireside chats are able to help with that process and our communication about those, how much that's able to help with the process, how much we're able to address with some of the work that's happening in research as well. But I think a big charge for us is making sure that people do feel as if they have stake in this too, because that ultimately, just like within the school buildings, and like I said, with the different action plans, those only work when we have the buy-in from the building. I think district-wide this works best by far when we have buy-in and stake from all the different members of our community. Does anyone who was at one of these want to chime in and share a little bit of their experience? Yeah, go ahead, Blanca.
I believe there were concerns raised about anti-Semitism and particularly at FMS and the high school, more so at FMS. But I felt like there were not that many people speaking, but of those who spoke, it was the majority that expressed that same concern. So I think it's important that this committee in particular be aware of that.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Maxine?
Savannah and I were in the same focus group, and when I saw her there and a few of my other friends, I was worried that it was just going to be a room of people exactly like this who like are very involved, and I know, and it wasn't going to be a conversation. It was more going to just be like, I agree with you. But there was people from all different corners of the school, underclassmen, upperclassmen, and it was very insightful to hear different perspectives. And it gave me some hope because I feel like recently, like people aren't, at least in the high school, aren't participating in things as much. I feel like not as many different voices are being heard. And I like seeing other people come and have very insightful and things to say was like, I know that like there's going to continue to like be this desire for change, like when I leave, and like, not that this is about me, but it's just like it gave me some hope that like there's still people out there who want to like make a change, and there's a lot of like people who feel the same way as me, and it was like I felt like it was a really good experience and really insightful conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Rebecca?
I was just wondering if there was any negativity that you heard about the DEI process, particularly amongst any of the stakeholders.
Yes. So are you, to make sure I address this correctly and accurately to what you're asking, are you saying negative comments that emerged during the meetings? Or are you saying negativity about like the way that we're doing this work?
More the latter.
Yes, there was. But I mean, in honesty, I think that I'm happy that folks who do feel negatively about the way the work is happening felt comfortable going and sharing, because I don't think that folks would have attended or shared if they didn't think that their voice was going to be heard at all. And I think that part is important too, to avoid, the idea of an echo chamber, to be like, okay, we have to make sure that people are able to at least voice their concerns. And some of them were able to ameliorate. I think one of the things that was tough for me is in those moments, I couldn't respond because it's not the purpose of the focus groups. It was for me to listen. So, there are some things where I'm like, oh, that's just a misconception. That's not actually the way that this is happening. But that wasn't the space for me to do that. So I think that definitely something for this committee. One of the biggest ones was about communication and making sure that people are aware of, here's what we're doing. Here's what this looks like. These are people that are on the committee. If you do have questions about some of this work, please feel free to reach out. I think that's one of the biggest strands that emerged. People just not knowing or feeling as if there's not enough communication about little things that do happen. So looking at this, it seems like Savannah, and then Blanca, and then Seema.
Yeah, like going along with what Maxine said, and also kind of what you said, Mr. P, there was a lot of like differing perspectives, and there was a lot of stuff that people said that I wasn't even aware of. And I would say that like being a high school student and like in like the same classrooms as like the other students were in. Like I would expect to like, like have gone through the same experiences, but no, like it was like completely different from person to person. It varied from person to person. And I think like even in one instance, I had said something about like the community at GHS being welcoming, and then just another person just like disagreed. And like I think that disagreement and then that discourse is really important, and especially amongst students. And I think it was really productive because the students were able to share, and it wasn't just like a bunch of administrators or teachers like trying to explain like what's going on. I think it was really just like having the students share what they thought, and then us, or like obviously Mr. P, doing the work to be proactive and responding to their concerns.
Definitely. Thank you. Blanca, and then Seema, and then Katie.
Just to answer Rebecca's question, for the high school call, we did have a person express that they felt that some of the work we do can be perceived as indoctrinating with regard to efforts made to respect, how people align with different genders and state their pronouns, etc. And so that part, for those of us who feel differently, was difficult to sit by and listen to.
Yes, definitely. Thank you too for sharing that. And then Seema, and now Katie.
I just had a question when Maxine was talking about having different students there who were sharing, like, how did that sounds great. Like how did that happen? Like, how were you able to get students who don't maybe typically join and participate? How did that work this time?
Oh, God, you got it. You got it.
Mr. P sent out a form to the whole building, and there was announcements on the like on our morning announcement system. And I think that like people understood that. I think that Mr. P did a really good job of explaining like what the purpose of this was, which made people understand the work we were doing and made them be like, oh, that's something I want. So they participated. But again, it was really interesting to hear different voices, like see new faces, and like I thought it was like a really good conversation and a really good like use of an hour and a really good way to miss class too.
Solid answer. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think that's great, the fact that you're able to get different students, because I do feel like, it's kind of like when you ask for volunteers, it's usually the same people that show up. So it's great that you were able to get some different voices that are not normally there. So I guess keep doing it. That's awesome. Thanks, Maxine.
And I'll chime in too. That's also part of what we're trying to hope to do with the Student Voice Subcommittee. And Savannah spoke on it, but that's part of the effort, is to try to make sure that we're broadening the horizons, because that's essential to keeping the work going. Katie?
I was in the parent group for the high school, and some of what was already touched on by Blanca and Savannah, but there were different ideas about how we handle gender identity in the high school. And although the conversation was difficult, it did open, I felt like it opened a safe space for people with different ideas to hear what maybe, or misconceptions about maybe how things were being handled at the high school. And I guess like the only way that we can really start to move forward is to give people the space to do that. So I was happy with how everyone was kind of handling sharing different ideas and letting people voice them, whether we agreed or not.
Thank you. And did you feel happy hearing that? Because that was the hope, that people would be able to have the space to be able to share their concerns. Honestly, even regardless of how I might feel about is any specific issue. So I think that that's important. And truly, we hope that we can keep that going with the fireside chats. And I think, like any initiative, we hope that it works. We really want it to. We put in thought and effort. We have teams that, are designed to be able to go in these different time slots and meet with people. But if it doesn't work, then, you know, obviously we don't quit. What we do is we go back to the drawing board and figure out, okay, let's do something else that's going to meet the need that's emerging. While at the same time, I think it's important to also remember we want to support the students going through X, Y, and Z. So, you know, I think there's definitely times where our focus and our goal is to listen, but I think there's also times when our focus and our goal is to make sure that we're protecting everyone's dignity and sanctity in different spaces. So I did just want to articulate that part as well. So yes, Elizabeth.
Did you have more interest from students or community or whatever than you could accommodate?
Yes, although that also varied based off of the building and which group. So there were definitely groups where it was too much to accommodate, and some I got a little loosey with the cap that we had. I was like, wow, let's just get a little bit more in. But yes, although some groups that wasn't an issue at all. So yeah, it varied. What I can say too, and I think it's worth noting here, for everyone, especially in the parent groups in community groups who wasn't able to go, they did also receive an email with an invitation if they wanted to meet and have a further conversation, even a one-on-one. And I would have still included that in the findings. So no one was like left stranded of, hey, I didn't get in and just I can't have a meeting. And some have actually taken up that opportunity, like, yeah, sure, I'd love to have a call or I'd love to meet. So that part has happened as well.
If there's nothing more for that, then we can move forward with our food for thought, which was a continued discussion of the SRO DEI initiative. I think that's probably you, Matt.
Yes, so I can kick this off. This was in our food for thoughts document that we all have. And Nina spoke on this a little bit earlier. But the idea was, okay, we have another SRO, and so what systems are in place for trainings? And I think, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think part of it too is trying to canvas, okay, do folks here have ideas, or is anyone here familiar with trainings that have happened in other places? What does that process look like? I think one of the main questions was, is that board committee still in effect? Because if so, then we don't want or need to necessarily be doing redundant work. But is this something where the DEI committee, there's space and a place for us to be engaged in that work? I believe that that's really kind of the tone of this conversation, and we can leave it open for anyone to chime in with their thoughts here.
Matt, just to clarify, the SRO subcommittee isn't a board committee. It's actually a subcommittee of the district-wide safety committee. I know we have a lot of committees. So the district-wide safety committee is administrators, the Guilderland Police Department, our health and safety director, Cliff Nooney. There's parents on there. There's board members on there. There's a teacher on there. So it's a cross-disciplinary, cross-stakeholder kind of group. And that subcommittee, the SRO subcommittee, has not met since, I can't remember when we met last, but since we made the decision with the board to pilot the SRO at FMS. And so I don't know if we want to get back together again, but that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. Nina, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess just to kind of add to what you're saying, you know, there was obviously the community has concerns about safety, and people tend to, you know, move to SROs as a solution. And I'm not saying they're not, but I think some of the research out there shows that it might not be the best solution. It's obviously one that we go to, but to make sure that because sometimes the opposite happens and places become less safe. So I'm not saying that's what's happening at all. I'm sure that we've fully vetted everything, but from the research standpoint, do we as a DEI committee want to establish a way to check in with people to see how they're feeling? Did this help? Did it not help? Feedback in general. I don't know what people think about it, but that's basically what where do we fall in that as the DEI committee when it comes to overseeing how this is going? It's basically what we were thinking.
Seema, go ahead.
Yeah, and it kind of what Nina was talking about doesn't have to be answered tonight, but I know. Sorry, I'll lower my hand. So the SRO for this rest of the school year was, given to the district from the Gilman Police Department for free, and then to continue that would be in the budget, right, for the following year and beyond. And so I guess we've taken it on as like a pilot. But I'm wondering, kind of to your question, Nina, is how do we know in such a short amount of time the effectiveness of it? Like, how do we assess that this is, a good match, not a good match? And then also the DEI part of the training, I think we put into the MOU with them is that they're required to have training that's related to what the school district asks. So that one part I'm happy about because there was nothing like that before. But I also just, this is brand new to probably a bunch of us, so I'm not really sure where we are with that. And I guess at what point do we see how things are going? Like you said, have like a check-in point or some kind of pulse as to how things are going.
I can speak a little bit to that exact point of, trying to think about things with a small sample size. One thing that I was also happy to hear about, Chief McNally had offered, hey, if I wanted to see what their department trainings looked like and to be able to get feedback in that process. So my impression is definitely that GPD is open to a partnership with this and making sure that this is something that's able to work out. But I think that does still leave the question of what role would the DEI committee have with that? Is it something where, I mean, I don't know that you could judge the efficacy of anything in 2 months, just being realistic, but, is it an annual kind of benchmark, or is it something where we might canvass student data, staff data, at the end of the school year to see initial impressions even? I'm not sure what that would look like, but I do think that it's worth us trying to think about.
A couple things I can add here. We have a lengthy memorandum of understanding with the Guilderland Police Department that kind of frames our working relationship with them. So ultimately, that agreement is between the Board of Education and the Guilderland Police Department. So I think the oversight formally needs to come through the board, but perhaps this committee can have some role in thinking about what is good data to gather, what would appropriate training look like, more an advisory as opposed to an oversight kind of role. And I do want to just make a couple points about the training piece, because there has been quite a bit of conversation about that. And a couple developments. One of the things that we talked about was including our now 2 SROs in the professional development that we offer for the rest of our faculty. Like, we have a conference day coming up in March. I'm sure we'll have some programming and some workshops around our DEI work. It makes perfect sense to invite Officers Sean and Officer Chris to one of those trainings. I also just learned about, last Friday, I was on a call with the Albany County Superintendents with the Albany County Sheriff's Department, and they offer an annual conference with a big SRO component to it, and all of our SROs will be invited. It's called CPAS. It's going to be up in Saratoga, and there is a strand related to diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. So things like, implicit bias, etc. I don't know what the actual list is, but I did ask that question of the Sheriff's Department. And Matt Hanslick from the GPD is our Guilderland representative to that task force that was meeting. And then the last thing I'll say, because I think it's a really good networking opportunity, is that the superintendent's group in the Capital Region, BOCES, has been meeting together with our respective law enforcement partners. And one of the things that will be happening soon is pulling together all of the SROs from the neighboring school districts for opportunities to share best practices, opportunities for shared professional development, and learning from one another. Just like, our superintendents get together and we learn from one another. Our counselors get together and learn from one another. So I think it's a great tool on the horizon, the near horizon, to support our SROs, and also have that question about, like, so what data should we be gathering to know, is this working? Is this accomplishing what it is that we wanted to accomplish? So sorry for rambling, but kind of a lot has been happening in this arena.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other thoughts they wanted to weigh in on this? And obviously this isn't something that, needs to have an immediate answer, but just, I think part of the thought process was to have this on folks' radar, to think about this issue and just the continuity, because this isn't a short-term thing. This is for longevity purposes. And so we just want to make sure we're doing things as well as we can. Okay.
All right, that takes us to the learning component. So there's some good questions that Matt sent out in advance. We read chapters 7 and 8, which, I just thought there was a lot of good stuff in there. But Matt, you had some questions you wanted to start with?
Yes. So for folks who don't have the book, I'll just give the names of this different sections. So chapter 7 is deeply rooted, leaning into family culture and history. And we'll start there. So the first question that for us to discuss and think about different ways, I would like to encourage, before we actually start the conversation, if you don't want to unmute, that's okay. But please feel free to use the chat as well, because that's something that we're able to share out. All of us can see it, and we want to hear as wide a range of voices with our learning component as possible. So the first question is, how do you connect your children to their cultural roots? Do you find this easy or difficult to do?
I can speak to that one. That one really touched home with me, just because, with me being Brazilian and at home, like, I'm the only one that speaks Portuguese and my husband's American. So I haven't been able to, like, teach my kids how to speak Portuguese. Not something that, like, I feel very guilty about, because it's too hard for me to just speak Portuguese and my husband doesn't understand it. So I've kind of put that on the back burner, and I kind of definitely regret that.
Yeah, and before going to Chris, I just want to chime in on that too, because honestly, I can definitely relate with some of that experience, being a child of Haitian immigrants. I know one of the things my parents went back and forth with was, do we teach our children Haitian Creole, or do we try to just make sure that there's not confusion with languages? And, both my parents have had rough experiences based off of accents, based off of language barriers. So I think that part is, it's definitely super important. So thank you for getting us going with that. Just verbalizing what we have in the chat. Blanca shared, celebrating holidays, food, music, and language. It's easy, spending time with my Peruvian family. Chris, go ahead, and then Rebecca.
A little different twist. I don't have kids, and I also don't think I know a whole lot about my family, speaking personally. But I think about my mom, who is now trying to find out more about our family and how important it is to her. And I wonder if I don't take the advantage of connecting with that now, because as our parents get older, we lose those connections. So if you don't have a family that's traditionally passed on a lot of heritage and all that good stuff. My dad was born overseas. I'm a first generation American on half one side. Then you lose that when they pass, and you have to do all those 23andMe DNA tests and try to track down your family that way. So when it got into all these ideas of how to make connections with your family, sometimes when I talk with students in my office, I'll get talking about like, oh, where does your name come from? What are some traditions in your family? And I definitely see a big difference. Some kids will still look at me like, ugh. And that would have been me as a kid. I'm like, I don't talk to my family if I don't have to. Like, why would I do that? That's crazy talk. And then I have other kids who get really animated and excited talking about language, talking about trips to see grandparents and things like that. And I think it's not too late. And it's still like, what I liked in this book was that it also covered, like, if you don't feel like you have that connection, how do you create that? And how can parents create that with their kids? But then we talk about working in education. How can we help our kids create that in their own families?
Thank you.
And maybe I should talk to my mom more.
Thank you. I'll realize what we have in the chat, and then we'll go to Rebecca and then Lewis. Gwen wrote in the chat, trying to hold family reunions and making sure to update and share information on our family tree. It's somewhat difficult because a lot of the spoken history is dying off as the elders transition. That's powerful. Yeah. Mary said, sharing holiday and special traditions with extended family. Absolutely. So we have Rebecca, and then we'll go Lewis and Katie.
So this doesn't really answer your question, but I think it dovetails with what Tayani was saying. Like, I felt really overwhelmed by this chapter. I felt pressure. And I hadn't felt that way with much of the rest of the book. But her ideas, I thought, were great. I mean, they were really central themes to her message. But I think from a parent standpoint, I just felt like I am not going to have time to do these like crafts and these heritage projects and these family newsletters. And I think, from a real life perspective, I think it's important for us to be okay with, if you get through the day, you're succeeding. And it just seemed like sort of a lofty ideal that wasn't necessarily always realistic.
Just with a quick show of hands, did others feel the same way, that this felt lofty, and not necessarily realistic? You could use the raise hand feature. Just, yeah, I saw some heads nodding, and I figured that this was, something that was going to pop up. Yeah. All right. Okay, so just some affirmations for you there, Rebecca. Before we go to Lewis, I'll just read what we have in the chat. I'll start first with Elizabeth because I believe it was directly related to that point. Also, wasn't sure what crocheting has to do with DEI. You didn't get the handbook? That was that's how DEI started. Crochet a quilt. So Amy H said, spending time with family and and holidays. It can be easy sometimes, yet difficult when our holidays conflict with our kids' activities in school, etc. We try to strike a balance by not making our children feel forced to make a choice. I think that's really powerful. And I also imagine extremely difficult. But yes, definitely. Thank you. And thank you so much to everyone who's using the chat. This is fantastic. So Lewis and then Katie. Oh, Lewis, you're muted.
Sorry, I want to share a little bit about my family experience. I think language is very important. My son couldn't speak. His Chinese doesn't work that well, but he does. He can understand. Listening is okay. So we first talk a lot of Chinese at home. Then he thinks that is language that is kind of associated with his life. So I think that's very important because he knows that he has association with that culture. And in the meantime, I really appreciate the school that his teachers could give his chance to talk about Chinese speaking, the language, the holidays at certain special Chinese holidays and celebrations. So that he feels like has something that he's related to that culture. And his teacher actually very helpful to let him talk about how to speak certain terms, describe things. Like rabbit is 兔子 in Chinese. This year is the year of rabbit. And things like that helps him to build the confidence in his culture. I think language is very important. The other thing that we used to focus on a lot is the travel and the communication. I used to take my son back in China every year, but due to the pandemic, we couldn't travel for the past 3 years. But I think this will resume in future. We indeed do the video chat with my parents and the family members back in China. So the communication, I think, maintain a regular communication pace with the family members that will help build a lot of confidence in his perspective for his culture. But so I think, in the current status, because we cannot travel, communications is still very important with other ways of invention, like today's video chat or like the some culture events. I really appreciate that Linwood had the international nights in the past. We can share our cultures with other groups. That's all I have.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. Language it's an incredibly important thread.
So don't worry about that. They couldn't talk in certain language. Well, indeed, the kids are very smart. They can understand. They try to speak. They will follow. I realize this. When I speak something, my son, in Chinese, he can really follow. I thought, oh, you can speak, but no, that doesn't mean they can't understand. So it's try to understand that they're very smart. Gradually, they will get to it.
Yes, and just from a learning theory standpoint, kids do pick up languages easier than adults. So it's just true. The younger you are, the faster you learn language. So 2 other things that came from the chat, and then we'll go Katie and Julianne. So Nina said, along the same lines, my children love to hear the stories of family heritage, immigrant generations, name changes, reasons for immigrating, assimilation, etc. That was very poetic. But yeah, yes, I like that. And then Tan said, schools hosting school allows families to get involved and share their cultures. Yes. As an aside, that also is something that came up during focus groups, people talking about opportunities to share their cultures, and kids even talked about that as well, at all the different levels. So Katie and then Julianne.
The chapter just reminded me of a assignment that both of my children were lucky to participate in at Pine Bush, of interviewing great grandparents, which they were both, were lucky to have. And so they were, they each picked a different great grandparent and interviewed them. But what school helped with that I may have not done is had them, write it down and document it and write up about the conversations with them. So, I just appreciated when reading this, that looking back at when Pine Bush had them do that, and that keepsake that they had of maybe something that I wouldn't have taken on my own.
Awesome. Thank you. Julianne?
Katie, I was going to say something so similar. When my son was in 4th grade at GES, they did an immigration project, and it facilitated a whole interview and conversation. And I wound up finding out things about both of my parents of immigration stories that I hadn't even heard. So sometimes I think there is a real role for school to facilitate some of this legacy building and legacy appreciation. And I think that is a nice way to sidestep that feeling of being, because Rebecca, I felt the same way. I was like, and I also felt like it was the opposite of how I try to create family ties in my family, which is to sort of follow our own family's vibes and organic, what pulls us towards something. It felt very scripted. It felt very forced. And like, for example, my grandparents were in the rush of like, quick, we're going to get married because my grandfather was going off to war in World War II. And I have a bracelet that he bought for my grandmother that he gave to her upon his return. And like, to me, that's like this very special family memento. I'm sure it's worth nothing. Like, it's just like little pieces of metal strung together. And so that was the other part too, when she talked about like, if you have the money to invest, real money into a legacy piece of art, like, again, it felt so forced to me. Whereas like, I have this like treasure this little tiny little piece of metal bracelet, but to me, that's a piece of legacy. So I sort of didn't like the part of the chat. I loved the ideas and the concepts and raising the ideas. I didn't love that it felt forced and scripted and pressured versus like organic and natural and just sort of letting what sort of evolves come out, right? My family, we're all hikers. So like, as a family, we've all hiked all 46 high peaks together. So we all have a 46er patch. And like, that wasn't something we planned. We weren't like, we're going to make this part of our family legacy that we're going to be hikers. It happened, right? And so that was one of my pushbacks on the chapters. And I didn't love how that it felt a little forced.
Yeah, and I think like with Rebecca, many would agree with you on that. For the record, I also don't have expensive legacy artwork. So just confirm that. Seema, and then we'll go to our next question.
I kind of felt like Rebecca and Julianne, excuse me, that it was a bit contrived. And maybe it's because my own kids are mixed, so they're half Indian, quarter Italian, and quarter Panamanian. And so I remember specifically one of my girls in elementary school did a project, and she picked Peru. And we were like, "Oh, why did you pick Peru?" And she was like, "Oh, because I'm a quarter Peruvian." We were like, "No, Panamanian." So it was like as they become more mixed and here longer, it's hard to keep track of. And also, like, if you don't have extended family here, it's harder to do that. But I like Julianne's idea of schools could really like support in ways that support like kids' understandings of where they come from, even if they're not necessarily physically here. And then it also reminded me there was, I don't know, a concert. This was like pre-COVID, so I don't remember anything. But there was a concert at one of the elementary schools, and all the kids were supposed to wear like clothing from their own heritage. And I remember this one mom reached out to me, and she's like, both my kids are adopted, so I don't really know. And so she had them wear like American flags. So I was like, oh, that's great. But it's so the like reading it was good if you have that, but also to not have the pressure of, I don't know all of these things, and I'm still learning myself as an adult. So that's what I thought when I read it.
Thank you. And I do appreciate you bringing up that point too about, and it was raised earlier as well, but a range of family backgrounds. I think about, not everyone necessarily does have heritage that is always exciting, which leads us into this next part. So I'll read what Rebecca said. I'll ask a question, Chris. You can feel free to comment on that new question or whatever else. But Rebecca said, class assignments on heritage can be hard for foster children, something to be mindful of. Definitely. As well as, I think, depending on your family's heritage, whether that's going back to enslavement or other things like that, it can be tough. There's also power, I think, in those moments where it's, in spite of X, Y, and Z, here I still stand, here I'm great, here I'm brave, here I'm bold, here I'm able to do all these other things. So I think it is something to definitely be thoughtful of. And that's why the next question is, what is a legacy mindset and how can we best infuse it into our home? Mary said, building on what Seema said, we have to be aware and sensitive to those children whose heritage can be painful. Blanca said also some kids may feel embarrassed with their heritage due to past trauma. Absolutely. And Chris, is what you were thinking something that leads into this or a different strand entirely?
It was said by all of the last 4 comments.
Okay, fair enough. Great minds. And we did kind of talk about this a bit, but I think, think about, given that we've acknowledged, okay, some of the specifics of this chapter seem out there, how would we define legacy mindset for ourselves, for our loved ones, and beyond? Dr. Wells?
One of the themes that came up in the book that I really liked was the whole notion of how home should be a place where your children feel safe and like it's their place, their spot. And, where they can be comfortable, where they can have their own place to hang out and make it look the way they want it to look. And I'm thinking that's the legacy I would like for our home, is for, my one son to remember this house as a place where he felt safe, happy, able to pursue his interests. And, I was just having this conversation with a colleague the other day, in that my parents managed to do that. And I'm so sentimental, even though it's way out of my way. If I'm anywhere near Westmoreland, New York, I drive by my old house and remember playing kickball in the front yard and seeing the window that used to be my room when I was a kid. And, it wasn't fancy by any stretch, but it was an anchor in a way. And that's kind of how I think about legacy, and not commissioning a painting or anything like that.
Thank you. What about for others? Go ahead, Mary.
I think when I think of a legacy, I agree. To me, it's not a possession. I'm hoping my children will, we have talked many times, giving back to their community. In our family, there's a deep tradition of giving back to your community and doing things for your community. And that's what I hope the legacy of our family is that they continue to do that. And I think, to me, that's much more important than a painting. And like you say, Matt, we don't have a lot of art. I could give them a piece of their kindergarten art and they can call that their legacy. But to me, it's giving back.
Awesome. And just for art lovers and fans out there, we're not saying art is anti-DEI. We all can appreciate some good art. It's just there are other things that perhaps connect a little bit better. Blanca, and then Nina.
I try real hard when my children have any kind of success to relate it back to my parents' immigrant experience, and have kind of, for example, when Isabella graduated college, said, this is part of my parents' American dream. And so any kind of success will just kind of relate it back to where we came from.
100%. I gotta be honest, that's something that drives me too. I think about my grandparents, particularly on my mom's side. And yeah, well, I don't want to call it time, but it's extremely important to me. I think about it all the time. And same thing with my parents. Honestly, it comes from a place of like, given what they've overcome, I don't have the option or the luxury to not be the best version of myself. Like that's just simply not something on the table. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. Nina?
Yeah, I definitely love all of these things that people are sharing. So just to add one more thing that we tend to try to do is add humor to things because I feel like it can kind of help to make the moment less severe at times, and it's something that laughter is such a wonderful thing to have, and it can definitely help moments of, discomfort, things like that too. And it's funny because what makes me think of it is that talking about the artwork, it reminds me of my grandmother who had these beautiful paintings, but we found out she was touching them up. So when she went to try to sell them to Christie's or wherever it was sad because she was trying to alter them and it became funny, right? So like looking at these situations where you have these family heirlooms, but there's stories behind them that make them more unique and traditional, and that's where memories become a legacy, I feel like.
Absolutely. I do like that, the touching up. So right before Savannah, Rebecca put in the chat, the author started the chapter with a quote from the Dalai Lama: "Home is where you feel at home and are treated well." I hope and want for our students to feel that way about school. There's also, I think, a legacy mindset, although not at home. And I totally agree. Very, very big on even just the language we use around it. It's our students, it's our kids. And I think really plays in the idea of it takes a village. Savannah.
I think legacy and the legacy mindset for me fuels my purpose. And just like going back to what Blanca said, like just seeing my parents immigrate and telling and their stories and their heritage and where they came from, I think that's definitely a motivator for me to perform and to give back and to create long lasting impact. But also, it's sort of like it's the foundations, but my legacy mindset would be charting my own legacy. And like, I think breaking beyond the barriers and breaking beyond all the stereotypes. And that's what I think would be a legacy mindset, is trying to create an impact that you want to make and sort of like seeing what other people's legacy have done and using that as inspiration to create your own.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No. Snaps for that. Snaps for that. Yeah. So Amy had also put in the chat, and Savannah got some love in the chat, but Amy said, "That sounds like a great legacy to leave for our children to see home as a safe place that they want to return to. As a parent of a teenager, I'm striving for that, yet at the same time trying to understand the desire for teens to spread their wings and leave the nest. As a parent, it's not a natural transition, but I think it's important to be responsive to our children's needs in the moment so that they will want to return." Also, yes, seriously. Yeah. These are the challenges where I'm grateful that that is not on my plate right now, because that seems incredibly challenging. I think, I'm one of 5 children, and now we're all adults, which is even weird for me to say with my younger brother, because to me he's still 12, but he's an adult. And I think that's super powerful, Amy, to try to think about, creating a space people want to go back to. When we're all home, we're happy. You struck more than a few chords, Amy. Did anyone else want to share the thoughts on legacy? If not, I think we'll do one final question. I think we'll cut the last one out, because the third one is a large question. And to be honest, I am almost in my mind, I combined it with the first one that existed with this section. Chapter 8 is about representation matters. and it's navigating the ups and downs of media and pop culture. So first question that we're not going to necessarily go into this specifically because it's encompassed in the second question. First question was about what are your thoughts about the hashtag not my Ariel outcry? Does it bother you when imaginary characters are reimagined as people of color? But the question that we're going to focus on is define invisibility, distortion, and tokenism. Give examples of where you've seen these in children's TV shows and movies, and what about the media you consume as an adult? And we talked about this a little bit before in regards to libraries and specifically with books. Like, did you see diverse characters in yourself, and others outside of yourself representing the books that you had? But I think using the hashtag not my Ariel background as a frame of reference, do we see that as being a form of tokenism? Or is that something where it's a genuine attempt to take a fictional character and a fictional being and say, for all the different, oh, well, obviously mermaids couldn't be black. Okay. I mean, I should, okay. I don't personally have a good background in underwater life. So maybe I'm not a marine biologist, but I think, well, actually, I'll stop myself right now because I'm gonna get myself into trouble. But go ahead, Chris. What do you think?
I followed this a lot because it just blew my mind that people were having this conversation at all, because no one had a problem when Ursula the Sea Witch was black when they did the first remake. So it was okay for a witch, a bad character, a villain, although probably one of the coolest villains ever, to be black, as long as that's that character. But you couldn't have the heroine, also not the best heroine ever, but whatever, probably better in the newest. She couldn't be black. And then we tied it back a lot to when Rue in Hunger Games, when they made the movie, and she being, dark skinned and like all, but it wasn't explicitly said, but she's from a district. If you're a Hunger Games person, but just like, I don't know, the argument about the mermaids and like, but oceans touch all of the continents. So obviously you would probably have mermaids of all different colors. And why would it be a problem? And just how happy some of my friends are that they want to take their daughters to see this. Black friends and white friends, because they want to take their girls to see representation of different people in like an iconic character. So it's just, I have a lot of feelings and thoughts on it. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, clearly same. Savannah and Maxine, and we don't have to stick to just that movie. I was just saying that could be a backdrop for how we think about that. Is that an example of token? Because it could also not be an authentic attempt. So Savannah, then Maxine.
So I'm taking cinema as literature this semester into class, kind of analyzing films and different types of films in like a literary perspective, through a literary lens, like looking at representation, looking at the plot, looking at the context, looking at the cultural relevancy of it. And one thing that we talked about was representation, tokenism, and authentic representation. And one thing that came up in our class discussions was like how like are people like are people in different like experiences, like are people with disabilities, like are they played by people with disabilities and stuff like that. And we were also talking about how like we saw this SNL skit in the class, and it was like how when like you portray a certain marginalized group, you always have the white savior and you always have like the, I don't know, but it was really funny. And it was really like true though, because when you look at any like screenplay that tries to have representation, you always have just that one white like protagonist or that one white savior who's coming in and always saving the marginalized group. And then we always, or like most people awe at that stuff, like, oh, this person is helping this person of like higher status is helping this person of lower status. And that's not authentic representation, and it's not at all like a good way to represent these groups.
Thank you. And I love the connection to class. Bring literally what you're learning to this. So thanks for teaching us all. Maxine?
The thing about Ariel, I was like, this is a literal fish woman. Why are we so concerned? And the race of this character has nothing to do with the story. So that was just like I was like watching these people get so violently upset about it, and I was just like really confused, contrasting these like beautiful videos that I like sobbed my eyes out to these like girls sitting in front of like the TV and being like, Ariel looks like me, and I'm just like on TikTok just sobbing because it's like so cute and these girls are genuinely so excited. And it like makes me think of when you play like Disney princesses like on the playground in elementary school, like that girl can now be like, I want to be Ariel. And because when you play that game, I was always, oh, you can be Mulan, like you're Mulan. And I love Mulan, but like it's like that girl has someone else to want to dress up for as Halloween and really look up to. And I think that it's beautiful to have these moments where you're so excited to see yourself represented, but at the same time, I wish that didn't happen. I wish it was so normal to see an Asian character, a Black character, a LGBTQ character starring in a movie with wonderful representation where their whole character trait isn't like that one defining minority. I wish that was just something that existed and was a thing, because it exists and is a thing everywhere. So I think that that representation is so important to, first of all, like normalize the differences we have. And it's like, these movies are so unifying. Everyone goes and sees a movie. It's such a universal experience. And well, I think it's gotten better. Like this excitement should like be exciting for everyone. And it should be not something that like is a breaking boundaries thing. It should be more normal.
I love that. Yes, just honestly, 100%. Just like Diane said, yeah, 100%. And so, Mary, this will be the last comment. I'll read real quick what Amy had in the chat. I think Hamilton brought up the representation conversation in a lot of different groups of people. Yes, big facts. I think because there was also a lot of pushback, as popular as Hamilton was. It was, well, no, they couldn't be. Yes, Bridgerton. So there's been a lot of that kind of conversation. So, Mary, go ahead with the last word on this.
Yeah, on the Ariel note, my youngest daughter has red hair. And when Ariel came out, she so identified with her and never identified with other princesses. And then Brave came out, and she was so excited. It was another redheaded, heroic woman character. And, as I was reading this book, you realize how important it was to my daughter just to have another character with red hair. And so for these kids who don't have these other figures in cartoons and in Disney movies and all that, how important it is to break those barriers and make that happen for them.
Absolutely. And that really does go to Maxine's point where, your entire personality trait isn't defined by just what marginalized community that you're in. Absolutely, it shapes, absolutely, it plays a role, but that's not all of who you are. It's part. And so thank you everyone for a rich discussion. I loved the engagement with the chat, and hopefully that's something that, I'd love to see us continue that with all of our meetings moving forward. The very last thing I'll say, just something for us to think about, and we can definitely bring this back to the steering committee as well, is about the format for these being live streamed versus having a recorded thing go up in isolation. So in looking at the viewership and the statistics of how many people are watching it live versus how many are watching it after the fact, it seems like most of our like the vast majority of our viewership, not an exaggeration, like probably 99%, tends to be recorded, watching the recorded session. And I think it's something worthwhile to think about. Okay, do we want to remove the extra step of having it live streamed and just have the recording available on our page? And just wanted everyone to be able to take some time and think about this. You can email your thoughts. If it would be helpful, I can make a quick anonymous Google form, and just everyone can select their thoughts on that. And then we can talk about it more in the steering committee and look at everyone's feedback for it. But it was just something that got brought up as a step that we could, for streamlining purposes, do that. So they'll still be publicly available, but just rather than the live stream where not a lot of folks are watching, it'd be easier on the tech end of things, and relief, I think, for them to not have to do that. And one of us can just hit record and go from there. So yeah, that's what I'll just make a Google form and I'll send that out to everyone to give some feedback, and the steering committee will look at that. So thank you, everyone. Seriously, this is a fantastic meeting. I know there was a lot to talk about, and honestly, I know the conversations could have gone even longer with the book, but I do hope that everyone has a fantastic rest of your night. Please stay safe and don't go out if you don't have to. My window's blinds down, so I can't see what it's like outside. Hopefully, it's okay near you. But yeah, just be safe, be well, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait. Oh, wait. We gotta. Oh no, motion to end. I
Yeah, you
forgot.
skipped the motion in the second.
Okay, good.
Unanimous.
Simon never said. Okay. Okay, so yeah. I need motion block a second. We're good. All right,
Hi.
bye, everyone.
Good night.